Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Bay tonight, our classic films Q&A, live Q&A session. And if those have been regulars have noticed, we didn't have any music or intro because it was a silent film. So we tried very much to find something. It didn't work out right. So it was a silent film, a nice silent introduction. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We see we're gaining people here today already, and thank you for seeing some familiar names out there. And understand that this Q&A session is run by the Bay Community Theater, which is a nonprofit organization that operates the Bay Theater in Suttons Bay, Michigan. And tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to be showing or discussing the film The General by Buster Keaton. And it's an action comedy, action adventure comedy. And it's a good discussion point. I think it's a very good selection. And I've always liked silent films myself, and it's my pleasure to be able to do this tonight with everybody. And also, besides having just me here, I also have two guest panelists with me. I have, first of all, let's start out with Ted Kroll. And Ted is a film historian who taught film classes at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and helped establish a movie theater that is still operating today. And currently, Ted is a member of the Bay Community Programming Team at the Bay Community Theater and a Leelanau County resident. And thank you very much today, Ted, for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Your wealth of information is great, okay? And I like your intros. That's good. All right, and other one we have today, we also bring back is Rita Wessels. Hi, Rita. Rita's affection for film began in her pre-cable TV days watching old movies. Her first job was working in a movie theater in high school and college. She continues her passion for the movies by volunteering on the programming committee at the Bay Community Theater. So thank you very much for everybody being here today. I appreciate it very much taking the time and volunteering. For tonight, we'll just start out. We always start out with a general question of our panelists. And the question is basically, this movie, why is it significant enough for it to remain in film history? And let's start with you, Ted.
Thanks. Let me just say one thing first off. There weren't any silent movies. There were movies without dialogue, spoken dialogue, but in those days there was always somebody making music to accompany the film. My grandmother, for example, was a pianist in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, for the silent movies. But in the larger theaters, they had orchestras. So it was not just, it's kind of a misnomer to say silent. And I know what people are saying. You couldn't hear the actors talk, but it was a totally different, a much different experience than when we have in the movie theaters now. And a lot of musicians got lost their jobs, their steady day jobs when the movies became the talkies. Talkies is the right name for those films that we have today. Sorry about the sun. What makes this a great movie is that Buster Keaton is one of the great filmmakers of all time, of all cinema, and The General is his best movie. So if you have a best movie by one of the great filmmakers, of course it's going to be film history. As he said, it's an action film, it's a comedy, it's a romance, but it really shows Keaton at his best as somebody who involves you by all his physical action. He's almost like a ballet guy at times, the way he can move so gracefully, and the split-second timing and all that kind of thing. And it's a train. I mean, that's a real train he's working with too. So you're kind of astounded that there's sort of a sense of mystery and astonishment at what he's doing there. So there's all these things there. And the movie's only about less than an hour and a half. It's an hour and 7 minutes, hour and 15 minutes, and it just seems like every instant counts, and every little bit. For example, he tries to get a bag to get his lady Annabelle Lee in a bag, and he dumps out the shoes, and it says, "Oh, what's the big deal with shoes?" Well, then he loses one of his shoes, and he can't find his shoes and all the other shoes. So what I'm saying is that every little bit, every little thing has fits in with everything else. It's just incredible that way.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ted. And Rita, what do you think, how this will remain in his film history? Is that significant? Why is this?
Well, thank you. I agree with all the things that Ted mentioned, and I hope we get to talk a little bit more about some of the details during this hour. But watching the film, it amazed me how much was packed into that hour and 15 or so minutes. When I read about the film before I watched it, I thought, how are they going to fit this all in this short amount of time? And I think it is a testament to Buster Keaton's creativity and his ability to see the story and direct the story, that he was able to put in so much detail in such a short amount of time while telling a wonderful story and engaging the audience and entertaining the audience through action, through comedy, through romance, and just packing it full without ever making it seem stuffed. It was very entertaining, and I think it'll continue to be entertaining for a long time. And also the film craft that they were able to do at that time without all the technologies we have today, I think is another testament of awe in watching this film, to see how much they could do with the technology that was available at that time.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rita, and thank you, Ted. Those are all important topics which we hope to expand upon as we do this discussion tonight. But understand, everybody here is a volunteer. We've got myself, Rita, and Ted are all volunteers for the Bay Community Theater. Behind the scenes tonight, we have White Fang. White Fang's always there to help us out. And so what part of White Fang's job today is to watch for and monitor the chat area to see if there are any questions from the audience, just like we have in a movie theater. So what I'd like to do is let you know is that there's a chat discussion either on your bottom or one of your sides. And if you could just get in there and chat. I see people already chatting there saying hello and get to see everybody again. It's really good. But what we'd like you to do is, as you come up with questions, if you're watching it, do you have any questions you'd like to do, go ahead and post it. And White Fang will help us post it, get the questions in there. So please do that. But to get us started again, is we have one question, a major question that gets, so we get things from people before the show. And the first question here tonight is, the general is sort of a hero's journey. What is the moment that puts Johnny Gray, Buster Keaton, on his quest? Was Johnny Gray trying to save the girl or the train? Why don't you start with this one, Ted?
Well, obviously he's after the train because he doesn't know the girl's on the train. So it's only until he stumbles into the freight car there and sees her there that he gets all excited. And I guess that's his moment when he realizes he has his chance to win the girl over, you know. But that actually, he's more interested in getting his train back. And it's not really so much trying to think of, there is some of this, you know, the love of the South and all that kind of thing in it. But it's more about, you know, his train was stolen and taken out from underneath him, and he's going to get it back. And that's sort of the whole plot. I mean, there's nothing much more to it. And then the girl gets involved, and you know, and then that part becomes part of the whole. You know, she gets mixed up in the whole thing, and becomes his partner in this thing. They end up doing it together, which is pretty cool. So, and the other thing I'd like to point out about it too is that all the humor in it is all visual humor. It's not there's nobody the butt of the humor. There's nobody, you know, there's no stinking jokes making somebody look bad or anything like that. It's just generally just joyful. It's a joyful movie in a lot of ways. Well, of course, there is a battle scene, but we'll get into that later too.
Rita?
Well, when I watched what struck me is that really got the story going, in addition to the train being stolen, is when Johnny Gray tried to enlist, and he was told, no, you can't. But Johnny didn't hear the conversation that was held between the store owner and the clerk, saying why he couldn't enlist, because the South needed him as the train conductor. That was more valuable. So that really important affirming statement was never told to Johnny Gray, and he felt really dejected, and he was sad, and it made him lose girlfriend. And then these little challenges, because the train was stolen, prove him worthy over and over again throughout the film, until he does get his hero's welcome at the end, and he gets his rank of lieutenant. So I thought that was a nice arc within the story, this rejection of being enlisted and then being given a higher rank at the end because of his bravery and his deeds.
Mm-hmm. So was he really trying to save the train then, both of you?
Yes. Train came first.
So much for romance, right?
In the end, he gets both.
He gets both.
Yeah,
right?
and at the beginning, it does state that he has two loves,
Mm-hmm.
and his engine, and then there's a picture of Mara Lee. So
right, but I found it interesting that he gave his girlfriend a picture of himself with his train. So he was giving his girlfriend a picture of himself with his other love, which is like a little amusement right in there.
Oh, that's good. All right. White Fang, do we have another question? So this is from Sylvan. I was wondering why BK chose to represent the South versus the North. Who would like to address this one first?
I can. It was a deliberate choice on his part. The original story, this is based on a true story of the actual train. The general was stolen by the northern, a northern group of guys, and they took off with it. And in fact, they were captured. One of them was hung, and this is the interesting thing: is there were 8 left over, and they got the first 8 Medal of Honor medals in the Civil War. But at any rate, apparently, Keaton was intrigued by the story and the idea of trains and all that kind of thing, and but he felt that the audience would not be very sympathetic to a northern character, so he figured he would rely on get much more sympathy for the main character if he was a southern person. But there's not a whole lot. It's not very patriotic. In fact, there's one point where he's waving the general the Confederate battle flag at the very end, and the colonel comes up and pushes him off. So it kind of deflects that whole patriotism stuff. So it's interesting that way.
All right. Rita, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that it was based on a true story and based on a book by William Pettinger called The Great Locomotive Chase, which was published in 1863. And that was part of the inspiration of the story. And Buster Keaton was a train fan. And as Ted said, he thought that the audience would be more sympathetic if he turned the story around and told it from the Southern perspective rather than the Union perspective. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the story itself, the interpretation here is loosely connected to it. It actually had the general and the Texas as the 2 major trains in the story, and actually what happened. But as Ted was saying, is that the Union soldiers actually did steal it, but actually the Confederates did capture them at the end and killed several of them right there on the spot. So because they were acting as spies, like it was depicted in the movie. So yes, Ted.
Well, we're talking about the background. Keaton originally wanted to use the original general, which was in Georgia, and he wanted to do it all in the South. And when the people that owned the general in the South heard what it was going to be a comedy, they said, no, we can't have this. So they went and they bought 3 trains and up in Oregon. And it's surprising it doesn't look too Oregonish. I mean, it could be the South for the way it looks. Mm-hmm. And they had a setup there where they had the right kind of train, the right kind of tracks. They had double tracks where they could film from one train looking, from a platform looking into it. And so there was this great setup that they could do it in Oregon. And, you know, we've had a bunch of movies talking, and in this series, talking about how they've been done on location, and that's really helped the spirit of the film. And here we have another film that was done totally outside of Hollywood. And it shows, again, that, you know, you had townsfolks in the background, and everyone just was making the movie, you know, it was just sort of an act of love rather than this under the thumb of the the studio and the producers. And it also cost a lot of money, so he got away with that by being on location too.
Yeah. So there was a lot to talk about this that topic, and it was true that they did film all this stuff. I had a shot I was trying to find here, and it did finally come up for me. This is like the film crew camera. You guys were talking about how they actually used 2 tracks, and it's hard to see in the smaller picture on the lower right. There was actually 2 tracks in a lot of spots, whether they were little side tracks going off like you saw they were using as part of the filming. But that's actually how they got a lot of the live scenes. I mean, it was all camera action, all live, 1 take, maybe 2, but it was just amazing how they could film all this and without any technology. It just today, that would all be CGI, and it would all be, you know, set up to take all the takes and everything else. It's just amazing. So
the precision is amazing, and they always use the full frame. I mean, when the train stops, it's right at the edge of the frame. It's incredible. I mean, it's
right.
just how they did that. And the other thing is Keaton actually learned how to use the train, how to drive the train. So all that business he was doing, running around and jumping on the back of the train and all that, that was him alone on that train. And it's just simply astounding.
I find that amazing, is that because this thing's just rolling down the track, and I was wondering how fast the train was moving, you know, at different points, because this thing had to keep moving, and it does. It has momentum once it gets going, and just amazing. What they did is amazing. And the picture in the upper right on this slide here that you can see in the upper right, that is actually of them getting the bridge ready to blow it. Okay. And I think that's an important point to know, is that the train itself, that was all live. That was all live. So,
and they only had 1 shot at it.
1 shot, 1 chance, and that's it. Right. All right. So, White Fang, do we have another question that is available for us right now? Okay. Buster Keaton was known as the great stone face. Is this an asset or a hindrance to the comedy Keaton presents? Is it truly a stone face? Ted, why don't you go with this one? I'll start you on this one again here.
Well, this is something that he developed from his vaudeville days. He grew up. He was actually, you know, he was one of those people that was born in a trunk, you know, and he was born in Kansas, but only because that's where his family was doing the vaudeville show. So that was sort of his shtick that he developed over the years. And it kind of it made for his character too. But I would say that, yes, he doesn't smile, but if you look at his eyes are all over the place and are very expressive. So while he never has a smiley face or reacts with his mouth, there's with his body movements and his eyes and all that kind of stuff convey a lot of emotion.
Rita?
Yes, I think the Great Stone Face is a name that he got because he always looked very serious. But the characters that Buster Keaton portrayed were very composed. They were observant. Like Ted was saying, the eyes are always moving and taking in the action. He's observant and collected. He's not oblivious to what's going on. He's very attuned to what's going on around him and taking it in. And this serious composure makes it look like the stone face, but the emoting is there. Absolutely. It's just not exaggerated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I think it's interesting too is if you actually, in Keaton's own words and everything else. So first of all, his family, his mom and dad, were part of the Keaton Houdini troupe. So they were actually traveling with Houdini through all this, and Houdini was one of their friends and associates. And Keaton got his name from by Houdini. Okay, because he would always do these stunts on stage, and like he fell down the stairs. I think it was early before that. He fell down the stairs as a small kid, and they say it's called a buster, like it's a horse or something like that. Somebody can't be busted or something like that. A horse can't be busted or broken, and so that's what a buster is. And they say, "Oh, that's a good stage name for him." They'll go Buster Keaton, and that's how he got stuck with it. And his dad would always use him very physically in the vaudeville act, and you wonder how what he learned was, according to his own words, he learned that, and it was told by other stories, it was his parents were saying, don't laugh, because as a small kid, you know you're going to do something funny. You'll just start smiling and laughing and giving away that this is supposed to be a joke. And what they were trying to tell him and convince him is don't do that, and just keep it quiet and be observant and just do your things, and the people will laugh. And he found out that was true. And so he was called Buster Keaton because he could do these things, and he learned not to speak. And so the silent films were perfect for him. So,
and apparently there's a great documentary that just came out by Peter Bogdanovich about Keaton, but Bogdanovich was saying that there were in some towns they were actually arrested for child abuse because of the act, and the fact of the matter is he was so well trained that he was never hurt. Well, I'm sure he got some bruises here and there. He occasionally sprained his ankle when he was doing these movies, but for the most part, he just had that wiriness and that amazing way to take a pratfall. I mean, that was his incredible gift,
Yep. All right. So, White Fang, do we have a question from the audience here? Okay, Marilee. Oh, this is a good one. The train wreck scene cost $42,000 in 1926, the most expensive single shot in silent film history. The train was left in the river and was salvaged in 1944 for scrap during World War II. Rita, do you want to start off with this and talk a little bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for those facts, Marilee. That's what I came across too. And the fact that Buster Keaton bought 3 trains to use in the film. As Ted indicated earlier, the original General was not allowed to be used because it was going to be a comedy and they didn't like that idea. So Buster Keaton actually went and bought 3 train locomotives to use in the film, knowing that one of them would be wrecked and could not be restored or salvaged at that time. And also, when they went to their location in Oregon, they needed to transport 18 boxcars worth of equipment to location to set up everything that they needed to do the shots there. But that's pretty astounding for that time, that you're going to buy one whole train just to know you're going to end up dumping it in the river. So I'm sure the finance department had a few words with Mr. Keaton about that.
Yeah. Ted, any further comments on it?
The whole movie was rather expensive. It was a $500,000 budget, apparently, which was a big deal back then. And the film was not either a critical or a financial success. And I think part of the reason is because it wasn't like that side-splitting funny, There's not a lot of har laughs in it, and there's this this pretty realistic war scene in it, a battle scene. And part of the deal with Keaton was that because this movie was not such a success, this was the beginning of his losing grip on the independence that he had. And so he made a couple other silent films that are sort of in his great period. And then sound came along. He signed up with MGM that took the control completely away from him. He wasn't writing his own scripts. There's one good film called The Cameraman from that period. And then the other big thing was he was an alcoholic, and he just was not liked at all. The studios didn't like to use him because he was so unreliable. And another thing you got to realize that in the 20s, that people would see products as sort of the movies as this expendable product. In other words, you would show the movie, get it out there, and then when it finished its run, then a lot of times they would recall all the prints, and it was made of silver nitrate, so they would break back the dissolve the prints and for the silver in the prints. So there wasn't any real sense of carrying on this tradition. People didn't see the movies. And so there all was left were these dubs that made them look very fuzzy, and they were run at the wrong speed. So everybody thought this was so primitive and awful. And where did they ever get an idea that any of this was any good? And then somebody found in one of Keaton's old houses pristine prints of the film in the early 50s. And that started this revival of him, of his reputation, when people actually saw how amazing these films were. And now we have these great digital versions of it. So the whole silent era is being reevaluated, and they were tinted too. They had different colors in them and that kind of thing. There's a lot to the silent film era that people are just beginning to appreciate.
Yeah, and this picture here I think is very dramatic, because when you're watching the film, you want to say, aren't they using toy trains? But yet you see the actual soldiers coming down on their horses. And then there's the train going across, and the bridge actually collapses with the weight, and it just collapses perfectly. And this is just the start of that collapse. And it's just really, this is like the most costliest in silent film history, but it's also one of the most dramatic, real life, put together, shot in film. One shot, one take is all they had. And to me, I just think that's unbelievable. They got it all right. Okay.
And you can't see it, but in the background, the whole town came out to watch this happen.
Oh, yeah. That's good. All right. Okay, here's another one from Sylvan. Does anyone know how many takes typically they get to take these perfect shots? Like how we hit the rail tie with the other rail tie and bounces off the track. I have a thought on that rail tie one. Maybe I see Rita noticing, so I'll give her a chance to answer this one here. So
yeah, that particular shot, what I had read about it is that was either do it right the first time or be severely injured, because the railroad tie that was in the tracks, that was in the way, had to be hit just perfectly with the railroad tie that Buster Keaton was holding. And when I read about it before I saw the film, I had difficulty picturing in my mind how this would work. And then when I actually saw the movie and how he really had to throw that big bulky tie exactly to the right spot to tip the other tie over to get it out of the way, that really was very dramatic. And that had to be done in one try, because it would have been dangerous. They would have wrecked the train. The train would have been derailed, and Mr. Keaton would have been, severely harmed. So that was one of the more dangerous stunts that they scheduled into the film. Can I see the question again, White Fang? Because there was another part to it. Yeah, the other part was that they did use a lot of film. So some things were filmed more than once to get the footage to be edited together. But this particular railroad tie scene was a one try.
Ted?
Well, I would just talk about his stunts. Keaton did all his stunts. Apparently, the only one he did not do was in the movie College, where somebody did this pole vaulting for him. But everything else, he was there. And there's one scene in another movie where they have the water tower on a train, and the water came gushing down on him, and he falls down. Well, apparently he broke his neck in that shot, and this is a different movie. And he complained a couple days that he had a sore neck, but it wasn't until later he got X-rayed, and they said, "Well, when did you break your neck?" And then they were able to go back to that point. But then there's that incredible scene of the front of a house falling on top of him, and apparently that was like a quarter inch or 1 inch either way, and he would have been completely clobbered. So I think that's another reason he had his stone face, because he was really showed his emotion at those times. It really would have shown. I mean, it's amazing.
So just even climbing on top of
That slight little lean there, and his face, his hand up there. It's just a beautiful shot.
It is. And it reflects a lot of, he did all these risky takes and everything else. He was climbing all over. Like I said, you don't see anybody else in that cab. I mean, he's the one running this train, and it's moving. And he gets up on top and just starts looking out. Other thing I'm going to point out, though, there were wing walkers at this time in life. People would walk on those biplanes and just, walk on the wing and do stunts out there while people were watched from below. So, or strap themselves onto the top of the plane as it did whoop-de-loops, like, oh. So, all right. But Buster Keaton had a real ability to do that. And I just want to make a comment, though, too, because I was looking at that. That's a classic scene with the logs like that on the ties at the front. And I know how much a tie weighs. You can't pick one up by yourself. So my only thought was also those were like balsa wood, and they were made really, or they were just fake, and so that they could easily be moved. But you had to hit it at the right spot to make that move, because there's no way somebody could pick up that big of a piece of lumber to do anything, even raise it up, even to hold it. So it's really strong. So I just had to add that in, because when I was watching it going like, yeah, they had a prop here.
Oh, you had to spoil it, didn't you?
Movie magic.
That's right. There was movie magic here. So,
but he's the one who really did flip it, though.
So what was Buster Keaton's inspiration for this film's topic? I think we talked about that before a little bit. Ted?
Mm-hmm.
Buster Keaton has one character in all his films, and it's sort of this fellow who is confounded by the world. All the world is just this is out to make things bad for him. The girl isn't quite in his camp at the beginning. There's ships that don't go the right way and all that kind of thing. So this is just sort of another one of a variation. Even though he didn't play the same character, he's played the same type of character. Somebody who was up against the world and did his best to keep literally his head above water sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Rita, do you want to make any comment on that then?
Yeah, one of the resources I read quoted Buster Keaton saying of his character, "My little fellow was a working man and honest." And that's how he approached all his characters, that it was someone that was identifiable to the audience, but the audience could identify with the character because he was a working man, and he tried honestly to move through life with it, whatever struggles were thrown in his way.
This is a good point then too. That's a good point, Rita, because he saw it as a working man and everything else. How does this compare to Charlie Chaplin? Because Charlie Chaplin always tried to portray himself with this. How does Buster Keaton hear what you're saying about himself and portraying his inspiration and everything else? And then Ted, how does Charlie Chaplin see his role with why people like him?
Well, Chaplin was very sentimental, and he was always getting people to weep for him, or he was well, there was that part of him, and then there was the little tramp where he was just kind of what's the word? Well, he was a scamp. I mean, he was always causing trouble and doing things his own way, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I have this book here called The American Cinema by Andrew Saris, and this speaks to this. There's a line: Keaton's most striking visual coups revolve the collision between an irresistible farce and an immovable persona, immovable and imperturbable.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Any more, Rita? Oh.
Well, I noticed, just a little, I noticed Sherry had the question too, were Chaplin and Keaton friends? I think they probably learned from each other, but their characters were very different. Like we talked about, Mr. Keaton's character was the everyman. He was a working man. He was honest, whereas Chaplin's character was a little bit more impish, had a kind of a scamp quality to him and was always trying to finagle his way through something. Whereas Buster Keaton's characters were more direct and just plug away and plug away and plug away.
Chaplin made a movie called Limelight in the 40s,
Yes.
The talkie, and Keaton appears in that. They play a kind of two washed up vaudeville actors, and there's a scene where one's on the piano and one's playing the violin, and that's the one time that they were together. So they certainly respected each other. I know all along. You know. But Chaplin was somebody who he was able to keep his reputation going, and he was actually the most famous person in the world when he was there. I mean, he was known all over the world, and like I say, Keaton fell into alcoholism, and so his reputation faded over the years, whereas Chaplin kept making movies all through his life.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another story.
All right. So Marilee asks us, radio versus TV and silence versus talkies. Does anyone have a take on this? What are we gaining or losing? Now, we've talked about this beforehand, all of us. Or what are the nuances one way or the other between what we have today and what was then? So let's just answer this question right now. Rita, you seem to be eager on this. Let's have you start on this one.
Yeah, it's a really good question because that's something we had talked about before this session. And I had phrased it as, or how did we phrase it? We said that the silent pictures, what is it about it that without having the sound that we have in our pictures now, how does that change how we watch and enjoy a film? And one thing I noticed watching this film is that I had to pay closer attention with my eyes because there wasn't the soundtrack to guide me along. So I would have missed some of the jokes and some of the little humorous things if I had not really paid close attention. Whereas with our talkie films now, you can look away from the screen and your ears can still follow the story. So I think we do lose a bit of attention, and we do it with television too. We have the television on and we walk away from the story. We go to the kitchen to get a snack or leave the room for a minute and we come back, but we can still hear what's going on. So I think with the talkies or with the silent film, you do have to pay closer attention to enjoy all the sight gags that are included.
Ted?
Silent films are basically a different type genre, a different type of film because people had to show things. The case can be made that the great American filmmakers all had their start in the silent era. Hitchcock, John Ford, Orson Welles was the only great American filmmaker that didn't have his start in the silent days, and he was a great respecter of them. But the thing is that people learned how to tell a story visually, and that's something that is lost a lot now. And what else to say? What puts a lot of people off about this era of filmmaking is the kind of acting that they were doing, and it's a very different kind of acting that we're used to now. It's certainly not realistic, but at the same time, they're showing emotions a lot more physically than just the way they say a word or something like that. So Chaplin apparently said something along the lines of, just when we finally figured out how to do it, they took it away from us. And speaking that the great silent films the great era of silent films is around 1927, 28. And that's when the talkies came along, and they had to bring in a different kind of actor from the stage, different kinds of directors too. There was much more melodrama. Well, I'm sorry. Silent film was all melodrama, but I mean, it was lots more of a stagey kind of thing.
Okay. All right. So let's take a So we got another question here from, we have another question there, White Fang. There seemed to be a large cast of extras as well as horses and equipment. How many were there? Ted, we'll go to you on this one.
What I understand is they had 500 from the Oregon National Guard. I don't know where they got all those. Well, there must have been a lot of horses. Well, of course, there were a lot of horses in Oregon at the time. Am I saying it right? Is it Oregon or Oregon? I don't know. But and then in the town, there were, yeah, there we go. There's a great shot of that. And that's one thing I like about this film is I think in the battle scenes and when they show the armies, it's one when they're marching along, you really get a sense of the size of the and the way they moved more than in a lot of films. And guess what? These were actual human beings. They were not computer generated images, you know. And again, a scene like this takes a long time to set up, get the horses there. And you see they've cleaned up after the horses as well.
So yeah, there was an army, 1,000. Rita, do you want to comment more on this too?
Oh, the extras? Oh, it was part, oops. There we go. Part of it was mentioned earlier that the whole town came out to watch the train crash off the trestle. And Ted mentioned that they were in the background watching this, but they were also part of the townsfolk. And I don't know if this was mentioned, I had to step away. One of the occupational hazards of volunteering to do this from your home is when your neighbor knocks on your front door. Anyway, there was actually a National Guard troop that portrayed both armies in the scenes where there's the one army retreating and the other army advancing. Those were the same people in different uniforms in both shots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so because it looks like they have the Confederate army going by, and they're using all the same horses, all the same equipment. Then they have the Union forces going by. Now they're more orderly, if you notice too. The Union army's marching after them, and they're using all these people. And it's just amazing, and it's all one shot. They're just filming it. When I can't show it on here, but there's the scenes where the troops are moving behind them as the train's going, and there's Buster Keaton breaking up, chopping wood, and all this is going on, and that's all captured in one take. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's one of the most amazing shots in film history, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what can I say?
Well, good. All right, do we have anything else there? How much freedom did Keaton have in the development of his films?
Well, that's a question I asked. There was this period in Hollywood when you guys would just get together and just make, hey, what are we going to do today? Let's go out and do it. And so there were these two reeler films. Keaton started out with Fatty Arbuckle, and they would crank out what they call two reelers, which were 20-minute films. And they would just crank out one a week or something like that. And there was an audience for this. And we were talking another thing about silent era. Apparently, because of the titles that were in there, it helped promote immigrants to learn English. That's another little sidelight to the silent era, is that for people to appreciate these movies, they had to learn English to read the inner titles. Mm-hmm. And so, because Keaton was a success, like for maybe 10 years there, he just was, it was just all this inventiveness. And apparently one of the differences of the general from his other films was that this is one that was tightly scripted, whereas most of the others was like, hey, we got this idea. There's one called the Navigator, I think, is on a big boat, and they just went on the boat and they just did every gag they could think of, So there was this wonderful spontaneity, and let's try this, see if it works. And then, like I say, when the sound era came in, again, there was a lot more it had to be a lot more regimented because of the equipment to do the sound and all that kind of thing. So this joyful improvisation was lost, and that Keaton lost his mojo because of that, you know.
Yeah, and when you listen to his interviews, which I think are really good, and the Chaplin also, and others, they talk about how there was really no script. There wasn't any script. And all the other movies we've talked about is like the script writing. How do you do this? And they say, well, Keaton puts it so well. He says, we come in with an idea that we want to start with, like the beginning and the end. So you have something to set it up and something to conclude it with. And then we kind of figure it out as we go along in the middle. The middle we'll figure out, okay? And that's the way you look at a lot of those things. And I also say that with these early films, they have the actors are also the directors, producers, and doing all the different roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they also have, they start out with one reels. So we have one reel film, then two reel films. I think this is a 3 or 4 reel film, actually, that we're looking at. And so as they got to more reels and more time and everything else, they had to start putting things together and storyboarding it themselves. And this is where I think at this point in film history, this film is so good because it actually takes a storyline. And they probably had to figure out what they're going to do, piece it all together, but it wasn't really a script. Because if you look at it, there's only like 3 times, I know twice, I can't even remember the third time, I think it's got to be more than 2, where you actually see the lines come up for reading, or those titles on there, you know, or that you can't see me anymore until you're in the service. And the other one is you can't be in the service because you're a train engineer. Those are the 2 I remember. So, but they didn't have a lot of that, but they did what they wanted to show. And this is all the army on the move, the trains on the move, all the action. This was like, to me, revolutionary to combine all this and to make it such a longer feature film with a number of reels. And I think Keaton had a lot to do with that. So, Rita, did you have any more to say on that?
No, I agree. I think with the shorter films, they were able to be more spontaneous and just work through their ideas and bring them onto film. But with a longer story or a longer film with a bigger budget, I think they had to be more structured and plan things out a little bit more in detail. And it was a different way of working. And as films became longer, the industry developed in a different direction where you had to have more things lined up and in place to make it work.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, this is another question. Thank you very much, White Frank. Johnny grabs Annabelle by the neck and throttles her for tossing out a perfectly good log. It's a scene where she's trying to help and clean up and starting to put firewood in, and she looks at the log and there's a hole in it, okay? Does this roughness, though, harken back to vaudeville's physical slapstick style? Rita, can we start you on this one?
Sure. So this is one of the scenes I was glad that I had read about the movie before I saw it, because first of all, I think I would have missed the humor of the fact that there was a hole in the log and that's why she tossed it out. And then Buster Keaton as Johnny teases her by handing her a splinter, and the splinter she puts in the fire, because that's big enough and good enough to throw in, but not this big log with a hole. And I think I would have missed some of that subtle and nuance had I not known what was going on before I saw the film. But then when I actually saw the scene and I saw Johnny grab Annabelle by the throat and just give her a short little shake, I actually was surprised and shocked. It's like, oh, why is he doing that? That's not appropriate. And after I thought about it more, it's still not appropriate to grab people by the throat and throttle them. But knowing Keaton's vaudeville background, and when I read a little bit more about that and how it was really very physical, he was tossed as a child into the orchestra pit and learning to tumble and to break a fall appropriately. I wondered if that was part of that vaudeville tradition. I don't know the answer to that, but that was my way of trying to figure that out. I don't know, but it was just shocking in that moment to see the man grab the woman around the throat and throttle her for a moment.
I have this book, American Cinema. This is Andrew Saris again. There is a moment in The General where Keaton, exasperated by the stupidity of his Southern Belle sweetheart, makes a mock gesture to choke her, then kisses her instead. Mm-hmm. This kiss constitutes one of the most glorious celebrations of heterosexual love in the history of cinema. So how do you like that?
Well, that's a different perspective.
I got to be honest with you. There have been times when I've done that too, but it wasn't pain. It wasn't hurtful or anything like that. It was just like exasperation, you know.
Oh, that part I understood. It was just like, whoa! It just took me by surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something I didn't like. I was surprised by that, actually. But I do know vaudeville, they always exaggerated all their actions and everything else and tried to go for the dramatic as well as the comedic, but the dramatic feeds the comedic. And so, but I was pointing out in this picture here that log was around and on the train for a while, because here it is. He's picking it up to do something, puts it down, comes back, and next thing Annabelle finds it and she's tossing it out. I thought that was hilarious that she finds this. I got the whole point. She's sweeping, she's cleaning, looks at it. It's a hole. Oh, this doesn't look good. Let's throw it away. Let's go get another log that's better than this. And he's like, oh my God, what are you doing? So, all right.
And it just the romance in it. She and he are always smitten with each other through the whole movie. It's just the fact that her father and brother say, put the kibosh on it. So that when the two of them get together like that, then to be together, then they're a good team, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
And she does some things that really helps him out too.
Right.
I mean, she does some daring thing, with the water and all that kind of thing. So,
and she's crawling around on the train and the cars too, and I'm like, holy cow. But I think there's a key point here. Again, we've talked about earlier, is that this is one of the few scripts on the scene line. And it says, don't enlist him. He is more valuable to the South as an engineer. And the character, Johnny Gray, never hears this. So, Rita, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's an important aspect.
I think we mentioned that at the beginning, that that really sets him or dejects Johnny Gray, that he can't be enlisted. And that was something that was important for him to do to please Annabelle. And then when Annabelle's father and brother see Johnny Gray wandering around but not getting in line, even though they offer to let him skip in line because they don't know he was the very first one in line, all those things, set him on his journey, feeling like he couldn't be part of the army, but in fact he was more valuable to them as an engineer, which the rest of the film shows that he is.
And nobody knew this, including Johnny Gray. This is the reason why, and it sets the stage for all this to happen before, including her to say, you have to enlist, you're not any good. I want to see you in uniform, and I won't talk to you anymore. And I think it sets it up really good, considering there's no talking. This one little screen says it all, for a lot what happens afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then there's that great thing that where he's sitting on the rail of the engine, mm-hmm. and his ejection is shown with it going up and down and up and down. It's just a perfect visual metaphor. I guess that's the word for his feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
ups and downs of life.
Ups and downs of life. All right. We're getting down there. We have about 7 minutes left. We got a couple more questions. Right thing, how are we doing on questions from the audience? Or do we have any other ones from before? Annabelle is the only female character of significance in the story. Why? Rita's laughing the most, so I'm going to let her talk about this one.
Well, it occurred to me that she was the only female in the story. And last week we did Dr. Strangelove, and there was only one female in the story. And I tried to remember what was the week before that. But in both cases, it was a situation of war or potential war. And so the male characters have the dominant roles because during those eras, that wasn't women's work. We don't have women in the army at that time. We do now. Yeah. Okay. But I think the Annabelle character is necessary for the story. She has to be there. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, he would only be chasing a train and then not rescuing his girlfriend. Yeah.
And it's a theme in many Keaton films where he's smitten by this sweetheart of wanna be sweetheart, and then he sort of has to win her affections. It goes through all his films. I mean, that movie, The Navigator, it's just him him. It's just him and this woman he wants to marry, and she doesn't think particularly high of him. But in their adventures together, they come out and fall in love with each other. It's usually the father that gets in the way too in a lot of these movies that keeps the he has to convince the father figure that he's worthy of the daughter. So, and I think that's part of the times back then too.
Yeah. Well, also a lot of the storylines in books and the performances on stage or the movies too always had the woman in peril, and this is where Annabelle plays this role throughout the movie, and she's significant for this. She gets abducted or kidnapped by happen chance there. She gets kidnapped, and then he goes to rescue her, brings her back, and then they work together and come together to save the world or save themselves. And I thought it was she plays a very good, significant role as part of the movie in giving Johnny Gray a really strong character, even though he's
wilting flower. What's the word? Wilting. I mean, she does her bit too.
Yes.
I mean, and I love the scene where she tries to get from the boxcar into the back of the train engine, and she's stepping on him, and it's great stuff.
Yeah, and that shows her as a strong woman in that era, and that I think that, and it compared with how Keaton's trying to position his character, I think it works out really nice. I mean, it's a silent film, it's short, it's brief to a point, but I still like the composition of this myself. All right, we got about 4 minutes left here, and I'd like to. Why am I? Oh, just a second here. My battery's going to go down unless I plug in. So sorry, everybody. We got almost done here, and I didn't realize I plugged my battery in. There's always one technical issue. So that was it today. So I didn't plug my computer in. All right. So let's get down to one last question here. We actually covered a lot of different things here. Let's go on to this one last question that I'm going to ask for everybody here too. It's a question we had before. And it's right here. This one. There was more action in the movie than comedy. And how does the action in the movie compare to action in today's movies? Was this movie revolutionary in its approach to action? Ted?
I don't know if it was revolutionary, but it just did it better than anyone else. And I think there's this sense that, Keaton is really risking his physical, his body and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, that's part of the thrill of it, and that's the action of it. And that's why I don't know if it was a great success, because it wasn't so much a comedy as was more like, oh no, that kind of thing. And and for us today to see trains like that and to see how they operate just makes it all that more interesting, and certainly, it was all done outside in real life, and when the train collapsed, that was a real train, all those kinds of things. So, like I say, I don't think it's revolutionary. I think it's just done the best.
Done the best.
Can't get any better than that.
Rita, what about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with Ted that the action part is done extremely well. It's really well thought out. It's plotted well. The timing is good, and that feeling. I completely agree with you on that, because that's how we watched it as well. It's like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. But I think comparing it to today's action movies, there are too many times when you can say, well, that would never happen, and a human would never survive that, and that's due to the fanciful ideas that we can create through CGI and other technologies. But knowing that this film was actually the person doing all the stunt work and moving up and down along the train. I think it was mentioned earlier, it's like a ballet, just the movements along the train and over and under and through, and that a person really did that. I think that builds a higher level of respect for the action that is taking place in that film.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And that's it. This film is an action movie. I really see it as an action movie with the comedy elements in it. and there's the love story in there and getting a girl, and all the stuff is in the movie. And it does have the elements of what we see today a lot of, which I think are done to the extent overboard. But I think both of you make a good point. It's real stunt work. It's real things that people are doing, and that comes through in the film itself.
And
yeah.
Keaton's a genius. I mean, there's nobody like him. I mean, there's nobody that can come close to, he had all that training on the vaudeville stage, but there's just nobody like him. And we get a chance to see all that. We don't read about it, we see it.
Well, I want to thank you, Ted and Rita, for today. This has been an enjoyable time as always with you. And we thank you very much. I also want to say thank you to the audience out there. I try to watch as I can all the conversations going on. And next week,
what? And White Fang.
And White Fang, and thank you very much, White Fang. Next week we have American Graffiti. It'll all be up live after the show sometime tonight on our website to start looking at the introduction by Kevin Maurer. And it's going to be American Graffiti. And do you know where you were in 1962? And what car were you cruising in? All right. So anyways, let's have fun this next week. We're getting into the summer mode here with American Graffiti. So thank you very much for everybody being here tonight and all the volunteers helping us behind the scenes and everything else. All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. We'll see you next week.